beyond reason, the person I built my life around. 1,000 memories crash into me all at once. Laughter at the dinner table. Soft whispers in the dark. Promises spoken against my skin. Lies. Were they always lies? How long has this been happening? How long have I been a fool? Heat surges through my chest, tightening around my ribs, turning my disbelief into something dangerous. I want to shout, to demand answers, to tear apart everything in this goddamn room until it reflects the chaos in my head. But then she speaks. And what she says next completely changes everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated. Your support means the world to us and we truly appreciate it. Thank you. I met her on a rainy afternoon in a bookstore. The kind of rain that makes the world feel smaller, like a secret whispered between the sky and the earth. I was flipping through a worn copy of a novel I'd read a dozen times when she reached for the same book. Our hands brushed, just for a second, and she laughed, soft and unguarded. "Good taste," she said, tilting her head toward me with a teasing smile. That was all it took. A few words, a glance, and something inside me shifted. We spent the next hour talking about books, about stories that had shaped us, and before I knew it, I was offering to buy her coffee. She said yes. That yes changed my life. From the beginning, she was different. She had this effortless way of making everything feel more vivid, colors that seemed brighter when she was around, and laughter came easier. I'd always been cautious, slow to trust, but with her, I dove in headfirst. It felt like I'd found the missing piece of something I didn't even know was incomplete. Our happiest moments weren't grand or extravagant. They were quiet, woven into the fabric of our everyday life. Sunday mornings tangled up in bed, her head resting against my chest as we talked about nothing and everything. Late-night drives with no destination, just the hum of the radio and her hand in mine. Dancing in the kitchen while dinner burned on the stove because we were too wrapped up in each other to care. I thought we had the perfect marriage. We understood each other in a way that felt rare, like we spoke the same unspoken language. I knew how she took her coffee before she ever had to ask. She could read my moods with a single glance. We finished each other's sentences, anticipated each other's needs before they were spoken. She made me believe in soulmates. Looking back, there were signs. Small things, things that seemed insignificant at the time. The way she hesitated when I talked about the future, as if she were searching for the right response instead of simply feeling it. The time she would disappear into herself, staring out the window with a sadness she wouldn't explain. The way she sometimes laughed a little too quickly, like she was trying to cover something up. There were moments when I felt like I was chasing her, like I was holding on too tightly to something that wanted to slip through my fingers. But love makes you blind in the most beautiful way. When you love someone, truly love them, you tell yourself stories to fill in the gaps. You ignore the things that don't quite fit, because the bigger picture is too beautiful to question. And so I didn't. I chose to believe in us, in the life we had built together. I chose to believe that love, real love, was unshakable. That what we had was forever. I see things differently now. Hindsight sharpens the edges of memories, revealing the cracks that were always there, just waiting to break. But back then, in the moments that mattered, I was happy. And for a long time, I thought she was too. It started as a feeling. Something small, a whisper of doubt that barely made a sound. At first, I ignored it. A marriage like ours, built on trust, on years of knowing each other better than we knew ourselves, there was no room for suspicion. No reason for it. And yet, the feeling remained, hovering just beneath the surface like a shadow that stretched a little longer than it should. The first time I noticed something off, it was late. I had woken up in the middle of the night to find the bed empty, the warmth of her body already fading from the sheets. Groggy, I sat up and listened. No sound of water running. No light under the bathroom door. Just silence, thick and pressing. I got up and wandered through the dark house, my pulse quickening for reasons I didn't understand. I found her in the living room, curled on the couch, the glow of her phone illuminating her face. She didn't hear me at first, too focused on the screen, fingers moving quickly, too quickly. Then she sensed me, and in an instant, the phone was flipped over, hidden against her thigh like a reflex. "You're up," she said, her voice light, too light. "Couldn't sleep." I hesitated. "I could ask you the same thing." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Just catching up on some messages. Work stuff. At the time, I had no reason not to believe her. But something about the way she said it, the way her body tensed just slightly, left me unsettled. Still, I let it go. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. But then it happened again. And again. Late-night texts she never explained. Calls she took in the other room, her voice hushed, careful. Plans that changed at the last minute, flimsy excuses that didn't quite add up. I started paying closer attention. The way she angled her phone away from me when we sat together. The extra seconds it took for her to answer simple questions, as if she was crafting the right response instead of simply speaking. The way she suddenly seemed distracted, distant, like her mind was somewhere else even when her body was right beside me. I told myself I was imagining it. That every long marriage goes through phases, that stress and routine can make people pull away for a while. But doubt is insidious. It starts small, a whisper, and then it grows. It creeps into your thoughts, twists your memories, makes you second-guess things that never would have bothered you before. I wanted to believe in us. In her. But belief alone isn't enough when the truth is pressing against the edges, demanding to be seen. So I made a decision. I needed to find out the truth. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, too quiet. The kind of silence that hummed with something unseen, something waiting. My pulse pounded in my ears as I set my keys down carefully, my movements slow, deliberate. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name but could feel deep in my bones. I hadn't planned to come home early. It was a last-minute decision, an impulse driven by something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. But as I stood in the dimly lit hallway, staring at the faint glow coming from under our bedroom door, I knew. A cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck. My hands felt unsteady, my breath too shallow. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to pretend I hadn't seen the signs. But I had. And there was no unseeing them now. The door wasn't fully closed. Just barely ajar, like an invitation or a warning. I reached for it, my fingers hesitating on the wood for just a second before I pushed it open. The room was filled with a low murmur of voices, a whisper of movement, the rustle of sheets. And then time shattered. There she was. My wife. My person. In our bed, tangled up with someone who didn't belong there. The world tilted, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She gasped, jerking upright, clutching at the blanket as if it could erase what I had just seen. The man beside her froze, his face unreadable, but I barely looked at him. My eyes were locked on her, on the way her skin was flushed, on the way her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find the right words, the right excuse, the right lie. I couldn't move. My heart pounded, hard and erratic, a hammering drum against my ribs. My stomach twisted, nausea clawing its way up my throat. My hands trembled at my sides, fists curling and uncurling, searching for something to hold on to, something to steady me in the chaos. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look guilty. She looked afraid. But not of being caught. Of what came next. And then she spoke. "This isn't what you think." A laugh, sharp and broken, escaped me before I could stop it. My vision blurred at the edges, my ears ringing with the weight of her words. Not what I think. Not what I think. I had expected apologies. Excuses. Maybe even silence. But this was something else. This was manipulation wrapped in familiarity, a last desperate attempt to rewrite reality even as it burned around us. And for a single horrifying second, I almost wanted to believe her. Because if this wasn't what I thought, if somehow there was another explanation, then maybe the life I had built, the love I had trusted, wasn't already in ruins. But the truth was right in front of me. And there was no looking away now. The silence that followed was unbearable. It stretched between us, thick and suffocating, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. My wife, no, the woman I thought I knew, was sitting up now, the sheets clutched against her chest as if they could protect her from what was coming next. The man beside her had already started moving, gathering his clothes in frantic, clumsy motions, his face pale, eyes darting between us like a trapped animal. I didn't care about him. He was nothing. A symptom, not the disease. She spoke first. Her voice was trembling, but not with guilt. with desperation. This wasn't supposed to happen. I let out a slow, shaky breath, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a collapsing ceiling. My body felt detached from my mind, my limbs heavy, my chest hollow. Every part of me was demanding action, shouting, breaking something, demanding an answer that would make this nightmare make sense. But I just stood there, rooted to the floor, waiting. "For God's sake, say something," she whispered. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What was there to say? What words existed for this moment? And then she started talking. Too fast. Too much. Scrambling to fill the silence, to control the narrative, to explain the unexplainable. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. I never wanted to hurt you. Each word hit like a dull knife, carving deeper into a wound that had already been torn open. I stared at her, watching as she twisted the truth into something she could live with. Something she thought I could live with. "I was lonely," she admitted, her voice cracking just slightly. "You were always busy, always somewhere else." I felt she stopped, shaking her head. "I don't know, I felt unseen." A slow, burning anger started to rise in me, cutting through the shock, the numbness. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. My voice, when I finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Don't you dare blame me for this." Her eyes widened, her mouth opening, closing, struggling to find another excuse, another way to shift the weight off her own shoulders. I'm just trying to explain. You have to understand, it wasn't about you. It was never about you." The worst part was, I did understand. I understood that she had already made peace with what she had done. That she had justified it to herself so many times that it no longer felt like a betrayal in her own mind. That somehow, in the twisted logic she had built to protect herself, I was the one who had pushed her into this. Something inside me broke. The grief hit like a tidal wave, drowning out everything else. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, the woman I had trusted with every part of myself. And she had done this. She had destroyed it all, and now she wanted me to help her pick up the pieces, to pretend they still fit together. "I love you," she whispered, her voice fragile, as if those 3 words could erase everything. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "No," I said. "You don't." The truth was bitter on my tongue. Love doesn't do this. Love doesn't lie, doesn't betray, doesn't shatter everything in its path just to satisfy a fleeting desire. She reached for me then, her fingers brushing against my arm, but I stepped back. The distance between us had never felt wider. I could feel it now, the moment where everything changed. The moment where my life split into 2 before this, and after. I had a choice. Stay and try to salvage something that was already dead, or walk away. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the storm of emotions raging inside me. And then, I made my decision. In the days that followed, I felt like a ghost in my own life. The world moved on around me, cars sped down the streets, people laughed in cafes, the sun still rose and set, but I was stuck, trapped in the wreckage of something I had once believed was unbreakable. Betrayal has a way of rewiring you. It strips away the innocence you didn't realize you still had, the quiet certainty that the people you love will always choose you. It makes you question everything, your past, your instincts, even your own worth. I replayed every moment, every conversation, searching for the exact point where love had started to rot. Had I missed it? Had I ignored it? Or had it always been there, waiting? For a long time, I didn't know who I was anymore. The version of me that believed in forever, that trusted without hesitation, had died the moment I opened that bedroom door. What was left was someone new, someone harder, quieter, a little more guarded. I used to think that love was about knowing someone completely, about intertwining your life so deeply with theirs that the lines blurred. Now I know better. Love isn't just about passion or history or even loyalty. It is a choice. A choice you make every single day. And she had made hers. I won't pretend forgiveness came easily. It didn't. Some nights, the anger still burned, sharp and bright, threatening to consume me. Other nights, it was the sadness that got me, the dull ache of knowing that the person I had trusted most in the world had looked me in the eyes and lied without hesitation. But I did move on. Slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt myself. Not into the person I was before I would never be him again, but into someone stronger, someone who understood that trust is not something to be given blindly. Love is beautiful, but it is also dangerous. It can lift you up or it can tear you apart. And the hardest lesson of all? Sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, they are not meant to be yours. So I ask you this, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have stayed and tried to salvage something broken? Would you have fought for answers that might never make sense? Or would you have walked away, knowing that some things, no matter how much you want them to, can never be the same?